So their thing was, well, didn't you hear? And which is a horrible thing to hear. We go, hear what? Says, well, they're going under. I think you need to give them a call. So I go, well, that's impossible. The record's coming out in 2 days. And it already got reviewed in the trades. And so we called 20th, and they got bought by Marvin Davis, who was a kind of an oil tycoon from Denver, I think, and decided that he didn't want to do a record label with 20th Century. So the record got released, but never came out, never did the album. The other band broke up. So here I was again in the 80s, 82, from having 2 bands we're going to have, you know, a great career with, solo, and then my trio, which I loved, to nothing again. And I didn't really know what to do. And when I was cutting Be My Baby, there was Patrick McDonald was the engineer. And he asked me if I'd ever considered doing commercials. I said I never even thought about it, you know. My commercials were kind of lame, and you know, Mitch Miller was doing, you know, that kind of really dorky kind of jingly stuff. And he goes, well, things have changed, and there's this new hot company from Seattle that just moved to LA, and I think maybe you ought to hit them up, and you know, because they're always looking for new singers. So I wrote a letter to them back before email, and had a cassette and sent it to him. Well, turns out the contact guy was Jim Brado. Turns out he was a huge Batdorf Rodney fan. Snuck into one of our gigs in Ohio years ago. And so that was my introduction to studio singing, which I'd always hoped that there'd be some way I could sing and make money if I didn't have a record deal. Well, finally it started. And so I started doing that must have been 83 maybe. And kind of went on from there. I started getting on some big commercials. Had a big campaign for Nissan, which bought our house in LA. Sang on records, got to sing Mötley Crüe, Theater of Pain album. Me and Max Gornethal sang all the backgrounds on that record. And Donna Summer, I mean, it was there were just tons of stuff. That was just kind of my gig then. And that went on for about 10 years. And then the jingle singing thing kind of dried up. I don't know if you remember, but Budweiser came out with an ad, and they were the big jingle guys. They had all these huge jingles for beer. And they came out with a jingle that had no music. It was a frog, animated thing. So everybody jumped on the bandwagon. They wanted their commercials to be like that. So jingles were dead. So I thought, okay, now what? Here we are, it's like mid-90s, early 90s. And again, wasn't sure. A lot of guys had their own studios at that point. So studios, bands were kind of using their own guys. Wasn't getting hired for studio work again. So I met a guy, Michael McLean. I started doing commercials, producing commercials, my own production company. Met a guy, Michael McLean, just via, there was a book for advertising agencies. My wife called, he called us back. First guy to call us back. I started doing jingles for him. And it turned out great. I started doing a lot of jingles. It wasn't as, I mean, even when I was doing ads, it wasn't nearly as rewarding as writing songs and songs that mattered. I mean, doing Ken and Barbie commercials and commercials about fertilizer, and it just didn't quite have the same, but it was paying the bills. It was great. So, but I remember there was a moment when I was doing all these jingles. I got kind of caught up in the jingle thing, thinking it was way bigger than it was. And a friend of mine came over who knew my songs and said, "Hey, you got anything new you could play me?" And all they had was these dorky commercials, and I thought, actually, I don't. I kind of quit writing songs, And so this guy, Michael McLean, who I was doing jingles for, he was a songwriter. We started writing songs together. And before you know it, he asked me if I wanted to do a little record project with him. So we started recording some stuff. Small label in Utah. And he had to talk me into it because I said, listen, man, I kind of did all this stuff and I'm kind of, I got to the point where just thinking about making a record kind of makes me sick. But we started doing it. And then we get kind of a minor deal with BWE, who was a Bonneville record label. And so we made a record in '96 called Don't You Know, which is a really good record. And it was like, wow, we made this record again with a different guy. And he comes from more of a songwriting, lyricist thing where he was as important to me as Mark was before with what he offered. So there was this great thing that, when you find that thing, you can't really imitate it. It just works. And we were so different. I mean, he was this Mormon guy who never had a beer in his life or a cup of coffee. And here I was, the touring hippie guy that smoked tons of pot. And, but something, again, like if you put that in in a computer and go, hey, what do you think about these two guys? No, it's never going to work. But it worked great. And it still does. We still write together. And so I'm back into kind of writing songs, just kind of with one foot out the door, not sure if that's really where I want to go, although we made a really great record. But at that time I got offered a deal to try out for a TV show, because I was doing scoring back then, orchestral scoring. And I did this project with Michael McLean called Distant Serenade White, where it was a really ambitious thing, where he wrote a book that was illustrated, and he wanted to create a score that when you read the book, he wanted to be able to put a CD on and time it where, as the people were reading, they kind of timed out how long it would take to read this thing and make a score for each chapter. And I thought, well, this is really clever. So I did that, and it came out great. It came out really great. And later, probably a couple of years later, my wife was on a field trip with someone that she liked there. It was a friend that she had met through school. And her husband was working on a TV show, Touched by an Angel. And he'd worked on St. Elsewhere, and he was a big TV guy. And they're doing a new show called Promised Land. And they knew that I did music, but it's kind of like one of those cringe moments where someone from the school, she's got a husband who does music, and it's like, oh my God, this is, I'll never be able to see him ever again. So we gave him the Distant Serenade CD, which is all orchestral, with songs, but orchestra. And I'm sure he hated thinking about having to listen to it, but he thought it was great. So he pitched it to the people who were the creators of the show and said, I think this guy is really the right guy. And they were trying all these people through big agencies, trying to get composers. And in the end, I had to work all summer on Touched by an Angel shows that had no music on them. And they'd say, listen, between 8 minutes and 10 minutes, create a score for us here. What would you write? What would you write here? And so I would write it, create a score, and I did that for the whole summer. And finally, I got the gig. They thought, even though they had other guys that were more, who had more experience with TV, so I get the gig, and I'm writing a theme song called Promised Land. It was going to be the theme song. So here I'm all geeked out because we've been through a down period, and here it is. I got a TV show. This is great. So I write the theme song, and I call the composer, who was really the guy from Touched by an Angel, who was really one of the people who was instrumental in picking the guy who was going to do the music for the new show. And I say, hey, I just got the theme song done. I'd love to have you play it for you. He goes, I think you need to call RJ, who was the producer who originally brought me in and introduced me to the people. And I go, why? He goes, yeah, you need to call him. So I call RJ and I go, what's up? He goes, well, we had a meeting and the producers and the directors met with CBS and figured that even though we loved what you did, we don't think you have enough experience to do this show. I just went, well, I just did this all summer. I did everything you asked. I won the lottery, and now I don't get the money? And he said, no, I did everything I could. So here I am, in this euphoric high. And again, you're at that point where you go, well, what do I do? So I talked to the composer, and I was so upset, but I didn't want to just be a jerk. And the thing I remember saying to him was, you just don't treat good people like this. And that was it. I thought, I'll never see this guy ever again. And so here we were, devastated, didn't know what we were going to do. And a few weeks in, they were doing the composer that they picked, his name was Ray Calcord, had worked on Roseanne for years. So he did those little bumper cues. It wasn't like big dramatic 3-minute, 4-minute scenes. And he was doing some stuff that he didn't like. So they asked me if I would do a couple of replacement things for him. So I thought, well, it's a little awkward, but sure. So I did some stuff. It was for music that was live in the show. They didn't like his writing. So I wrote a couple of things and went up to Utah where they were filming and recorded them, and then went back to LA to do the sweetening, and they were recording the main title theme song for Promised Land, and it was a guy and a girl singing. So I'm in the studio at the same time, and producer's there with me, RJ, and he says to the producer who's recording the song for Promised Land in the other room, hey, why don't you add John to the theme song? And he goes, well, I'm sorry, RJ, it's a duo. And he goes, well, make it a trio. So I got to be on the theme song. And here I am. I hadn't seen Mark since my last phone call with him, Mark Lichtman. And here I am now in his session, singing on a song that he had written for a duet. And I kind of, there, and I kind of helped write some of the parts. I didn't think his parts were very good, so I fixed up some of the parts. I just can't help myself. And so that got done, and then eventually they kept asking me to do more and more for the guy they had hired because they didn't like what he did. And there was a meeting where he had got RJ, who was the producer, went over to Ray's house and listened to the score he was doing for like maybe the 5th or 6th show of Promised Land. And he gave him all these notes. Here's what I want fixed. And they got the score and he didn't fix any of it. So here we are, it's the 11th show's done, and they don't want him to work there anymore. They came back to me and asked me if I would take over from show 12 on. And so the fact that I didn't be a jerk, just, as much as I really was so pissed, sorry, I don't mean to say that, but upset, that I held it together and eventually found my way back into the circle. Well, here I am, I get the gig, and first show is finally on the air, and I'm euphoric. Oh my God, after all this time, all this work, all this pain, all this suffering of ups and downs, which I'm used to. It's just kind of the gig. I finally get the gig. So I'm about 3 shows in, and the composer, Ray Calcord, threatens to sue the people from Promised Land for breaking his contract. So that was back in the days we did 23 shows a year. So here I am again, and they proposed to me, we would like to appease Ray and have him do every other show. So here I am again. I got the gig, and now this guy is going to take half the shows. And what's hilarious, because I kind of bring my own flavor. I mean, this my guitar thing, it's just always going to be me. Whatever I write, for whatever it is always going to have that flavor in it. And it really worked for the show. It was kind of a traveling show. It was outside, and he was doing these cues they didn't like. So as he's doing the shows that I didn't do, he's copying my style in his score because he knows they like that, which I thought was a hoot. Not in a good way, but... So eventually after that year, he was out of the picture. And I got, the next year, I got the whole year. And third year, I was at my meeting for the third year of Promised Land. And I'm at the meeting where they call a spotting session, where everyone's in the room, all the sound effect people, all the people they need to make the post-production stuff, the music, are in the meeting, and they talk about, here's the show, John, we need cues here, blah, 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 and they give you some stuff to listen to, and they want you to kind of have that feeling. And they go, by the way, Martha Williamson, who was the creator of the show, they went down to a place in New Orleans and saw Keb Mo, and they'd really like to have maybe Keb do a score on the show. You're going to get paid, don't worry, but they want to have Keb. I didn't know who Keb was. I ended up meeting him. He's a great guy, great talent. And so I remember here we are again. I go up there and I have to meet Keb, and when I'm doing a guitar thing for the kid, he was in the show, plays guitar, he doesn't really play, so I wrote something for him that he could play with Keb. And I played it, and then he pretended he was playing it. And so I'm writing the cues for the show, even though mine might not get in the show. So here comes RJ Visiglia, who was the producer, and here I am in the studio in Salt Lake with Keb. And so RJ says, how's the score going? He goes, oh, it's going great. And he goes, well, can I hear it? He goes, no, it's right here. And RJ goes, it needs to go from here to the recording. And so I kind of thought that, I don't know if Keb's, he's absolutely great, man. He's one of my favorites. I said, I don't know that he knows what kind of gig this is, where you're grinding for 3 days, in your pajamas without ever going out of the house, trying to get the score done. And it turned out he didn't do it. It wasn't for him, And so it was another bullet that, dodged again. And so the show went on, and it got canceled after 3 seasons. But they really liked me because they know that if they told me this needs to be done Tuesday, they could get it Monday night. I was just that kind of, I never wanted to be late. I always wanted to make sure I got everything done, even if it meant working all night and taking it in the morning. I didn't want to risk not getting done. And I wrote every cue for every show. And so they asked me if I'd stay on Touch by an Angel and do the source music, which was all, because there's a lot of live music in the show, and they needed someone to either create the music or work with the people who were in the show, make sure it looked legit. And some people were actors, didn't really play. You got to tell them, you can't hold the guitar, here's how you do it, or the microphone's here, you can't sing over here, that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, this is a pretty cool gig. And it became a great gig. I did everything from country music to circus music to school music. And that went on for 4 more years. It was just great. It was just great. And finally it got canceled, and there was a pilot for a show called Postcards from Heaven that was so good. And I did the score for that, and it didn't get picked up. And right around that time, this is 2004, I got a call from James Lee Stanley, who's a guy I met in the 70s, singer-songwriter, and wanted to know if I'd be interested in doing a project with him. And I said, well, what is it? He goes, I want to do acoustic versions of early Rolling Stone songs. And probably have it done in a month. And I said, well, the TV thing's not happening right this second. But yeah, I think I have the time. Well, we got really into it. And I got so back into the recording thing, I just got lost in it. And so it took us 7 months to do it. And from that point on, people started asking us to come out and play. And so I asked my wife, I go, well, you know, I don't think the TV thing's happening now, so maybe I should just go back to recording. And so I was inspired to write, and here I am, 2021, still inspired to write songs and record them.
Had you done any albums during that time with the TV or?
No, yeah, there was no time. In the off time, I had 7 months where you just grind it out. In those 3 months that I was not working, I didn't play any music at all. I couldn't, because that's all I did. And it felt like such a job. There was no joy in it. And to write songs, there needs to be some kind of a joy thing that's happening.
So there must have been a lot of joy following 2004 because you put out a lot of albums after that.
I haven't stopped. I'm working on one right now.
Tell me about that one.
Well, it's, I did an album last year, right before the pandemic hit, right before the lockdown hit. And, I was going to go out and tour like I always do, new music, go out and do another tour. And pandemic hit last March, and we were all locked down and I couldn't go on tour. So I had this new album and couldn't tour, and so I just have done what everyone else has done in the world, is try to cope with the new reality. And I had this new album, so I wasn't really into writing songs. So I just got done. And usually I learn them, I go out and play them, and try to sell the records. And it's funny, when the election happened, and I'm not a political guy, but something happened when the election happened, and I just had this sudden rush of artistic ideas. I just felt such euphoric joy that I had to do it some way. I had to. So I grabbed the guitar, and all these songs started coming out, and they were all these really happy sounding songs. I thought, just go with it, man. Even if you write 2 songs, it's making you feel good. It's something that I've always needed for my soul, is to write, because it's something about writing songs that it's hard to explain. Songwriters are kind of these people that somehow have this gift to hear songs before anybody else does, and we write them, and then we want to share them with everybody else. It's just this thing. And so now I've got 6 songs. I thought, well, I can put out a digital EP. So I'm recording all those songs right now, and have been hiring people all over the United States to play cello, electric guitar, mandolin, vocalists. I had my friend Harry Simpson from Silver sang on one of the new songs. Got a fiddle player to play on something. So we're all doing it virtually. But it's great, and I get so lost in it, and the hours go by, and you look there, and you go, my God, it's been 8 hours I've been in the studio working on the bass part or something. But it's okay. Maybe you're exhausted at the end of the day, but it's just great. And but the thing is when, as a songwriter, when it comes, you have to do it, because I always feel like if I don't do it, someone else is going to get that song. And I want to be the guy, and here I am, 68 years old, started 50 years ago recording. I don't want to take one song with me. I want to make sure that every song I've ever written is going to get recorded, because that's kind of what I'm here for.
Would you mind playing a song or two, even if it's not the whole song, to give an example of your new stuff, or if it's not amenable to a
I don't
single
have
guitar?
any new thing yet, but what can I play? I don't know. Can we just take one little break for a second?
Totally.
Okay.